Hi, everyone. My name is Nissa Brown with Music Ed Forward. And today I am excited to share with you some thinking about switching from in person learning in the music classroom to home learning or online learning. I am the creator of the e-learning and music education group on Facebook, so we may have run into one another there. And we've been having some amazing conversations about switching from in-person learning to home learning or online learning. And I've had the privilege of working with folks all over the world as an international music education consultant. And I've watched many folks all the way from China, now all the way to the US, go through the beginning, middle, and continuing stages of figuring out this home learning and online learning thing. And one of my jobs as a consultant is to work on day-to-day learning with music teachers in the classroom, but it's also to look at more visioning or big picture thinking. And I often work with educational leaders, curriculum directors, and administrators on that. So it's with both of those lenses that I've put together what I'm going to share with you today. My goal is to help us see that this process of moving to home learning or online learning is an evolution. It's something that most of us don't feel particularly prepared for, and it's something that requires a different kind of professional savvy, as well as some self-care and some mindset work in order to make sure that we stay happy and healthy throughout this process. So when we look at this phases of implementation of home learning in music education, those were really my purposes for creating it, was to normalize this evolution that all of us are going through in trying to navigate a very, very difficult global pandemic with the coronavirus or COVID-19, in addition to trying to manage our new educational setting and trying to reach our students, many of whom we don't feel like we're adequately serving, especially if they don't have the technology that would help us reach them in their homes. So I hope that you find this video helpful. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to my screen now so that you can see what I've put together. So here we have what I'm calling the phases of implementation of home learning in music education. And I just want to start by saying there's nothing sacred about this. There is nothing correct about it. And there's nothing necessarily even complete about it. So I've put it together to be a helpful guide with the understanding that everybody's path is going to be a bit different. And when you and I look back on this 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, we might see some changes and some differences here. And that's okay. This is intended to be a helpful draft as we navigate this change and this difficulty together. So here's what I've done. I've put together phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, along with some possible categories, some things to consider as you navigate your way through this process. So I've given each of these phases approximate timeframes, and I just want to be clear, there's nothing correct about these timeframes. There's nothing that says this phase 1 is going to be only 1 to 3 weeks for you. It may be longer, it may be shorter, depends on how tech savvy you are, depends on how prepared your school district was to help you know what to do. There are so many variables. But what I wanted to say here really in this phase 1 is this is not something you get your head around in a week or even 2, and probably not even 3, but maybe you start to work your way through phase 1 in that time period. And then phase 2 would look like 4 to 6-ish weeks, depends. And then phase 3 would be, when you've been at this a couple of months, here are some things to think about. Started looking at educational activities, and I'm going to do just a real brief overview of this in this video. And please know that there's a specific phase 1 video, so just to go more in depth on that, a specific phase 2 video separate, and a separate phase 3 video as well. So this is intended to be a broad overview, and you are more than welcome to check out those other free videos as well, and just dive in a little bit deeper into whichever phase you think you might be. So when we look at educational activities to consider, the ones in phase one really start with not teaching music. They really start with helping our kids just get their heads around the technology and reconnect with us. In phase two, we might start to think about small ways we could reinforce our music curriculum. And by the time we get to phase three, we're really thinking about how we can teach music curriculum in some way, shape, or form online. When we look at strategies to simplify, the first piece to look at in phase one is really to think about how can I either chunk things, so chunking multiple grade levels, or perhaps finding a theme that could run across courses or grade levels. Some strategies to simplify in phase two is to look at things that can be best done at home, and they may look different than the things that you've done in your classroom, and that has to be okay. And then when we get to phase three, we really sort of regain a more of a music curriculum focus, and we start to look at what are the structures in place that can help us simplify our thinking and structure our thinking, and how do we group that then for students? How do we deliver that in stages for students? When we look at tech to focus on, the most important thing with phase one is just to focus on what your school is already using. Phase one is not a time for fancy apps. It's not a time to integrate lots of new things. Focus on the platform your school has given you and use that. Does it have limitations? Absolutely. Was it made for music teachers? Almost 100% surely not, but use it anyways. Figure out what it can do and go with that. When we go into phase two, you might add one or two music apps to help you teach content, but you're going to keep it real simple and continue to focus on your school's platform. And by the time we get to phase three, we would be looking probably at adding some very specifically curated technology that could add or reinforce the curriculum that you're trying to teach. When we look at possible pitfalls, I feel like there are so many in each category, but I think the biggest one for phase one is thinking that somehow what we're doing online can replicate what we were doing in the classroom. And we really deeply want to believe that. We want to continue to deliver the same quality of instruction, same caliber of instruction, the same rigor, the same beautiful music that we want to offer them in the classroom. And it just can't happen. We don't have the technology to do simultaneous ensemble work, among other things. When we get into phase two, I think one of the big dangers is thinking, we should probably have this figured out by now. We've been doing it 3 or 4 weeks. Too much to learn. Steep learning curve, so many possibilities, hard to narrow down what you can do in this new learning environment. So you shouldn't have it figured out by phase two. It's still the beginning stages of figuring out how you can deliver small pieces of curriculum online. And by the time we get to phase three, one of the possible pitfalls is trying to use perhaps too robust technology or things that might be a bit flashy. And so I think it's important to still keep it simple and very, very specifically curate what we are using with students. When we look at the final 3 phases of, categories of the phases of implementation, I wanted to give a specific nod to mindset and self-care because I think in a lot of ways we try to separate the personal and the professional, and there are some really, really good reasons to do that, although most educators I know show up with their heart first, and that's a really important part of teaching. I think it's impossible right now to separate the fact that all of us are dealing with a very, very scary and difficult and uncertain day to day. And our students do that as well. Our students are experiencing that same thing as well. And they miss us and we miss them. And so we need to be really, really conscious of the mindset that we go into this with and how we care for ourselves and others along the way. So this category is just super, super important. I think in phase one, we just need to give ourselves oodles and oodles of grace. We have to be so patient with what we don't know how to do. We have to be patient with the mistakes. And we have to make space for our emotions and how we're experiencing this incredibly chaotic and uncertain time. We just have to be honest about that with ourselves, and even better if we can do it with other people as well. In phase two, we need to give ourselves credit for what we've done so far Let go of the limitations of things that haven't worked, or let go of the limitations of what our school platform will provide or what they will or won't allow us to use because of student privacy and student data, and do the best that we can with what we have without feeling responsible for the things we can't control. When we get to stage 3, I think that it's really important to take an honest and clear look at what can and can't be accomplished in terms of curriculum. And we need to let go of the fact that there are things that we can't get to this year. There are things that we're not going to be able to do. And there are things that we're going to have to prioritize that are different in online learning than they would be in the classroom. And all of that is okay. It's all part of this process. And the more we struggle and resist against it being the way it is, the more energy goes into the resistance and the less we have for ourselves, for our families, for our creativity, and for our students. So some things to start to think about. This start to think about category is really to help us, if we're in phase 1, start to think about how we move into phase 2. Or if we're in phase 2, to start to think about how do we move into phase 3. So that's what these questions are really about. So when you're in phase 1, start to think about what are some small pieces that you could incorporate into your upcoming lessons that would help teach music content again. Because remember, phase 1's really about making sure kids have the technology, reconnecting with them, finding beauty in the music that you're sharing with them, and using music as something that reconnects you to yourself and also to your classroom community across the miles. In phase 2, if we start to ask ourselves, what are a couple of formative or summative assessments that we could create, that really helps move our thinking into what are we going to prioritize learning for the rest of the year, which is what we're talking about in phase 3. So start to think about what are some things that you could assess with the understanding that you might or might not be responsible for delivering a grade for your students, right? Assessments in this case may just be ways that you know what students are learning and what you need to do as a student, or as a teacher to help them, It may have nothing to do with the fact that you're giving a grade, right? Those are two different things. And then start to think about, how could students collaborate meaningfully online? How can I help them reconnect with their classmates and do music learning or even social emotional learning online? Because these questions will help take us into the work we want to do in phase 3. And then in phase 3, we want to ask ourselves the question, if we're going to prioritize certain learning for the rest of the year, and as much as many of us don't want to believe that's how long we're going to be away from our students, it is very, very likely, if not certain, that is the case in many, if not most parts of the world at this point. So you want to ask yourself, where does the learning lead? This learning that we're doing in phase 3, where's it going? How is it going to prepare them for the next time I see them, the next unit of study? Finally, I put a few keywords, not because there's anything particularly right about them or perfect about them, but because if you need a mantra, you need something to put on a sticky note in front of your desk, here are some words that I think are golden for each of these phases. In phase 1, connect. Connect with yourself, connect with the people that you care about in your personal life, connect with your colleagues, and connect with your students. Simplify. It is almost 100% true that people are doing too much. Do simple things that make a difference and choose them very, very carefully. And the third one is breathe. And I actually have breathe in each box, and I laughed at myself a little bit when I did that, but you know what? I think all of us, when we get anxious, we have a tendency to hold the breath, and that also always increases anxiety. So just remembering to breathe. In phase 2, we're going to add some things, but we're still going to pace ourselves, slow and steady. I think many of us went into this thinking it's a sprint, and most people I'm communicating with are realizing this is more of a half marathon, if not a marathon. So we need to do slow and steady. You need to pace yourself, and your students need for you to pace the learning for them. And of course, breathe. In phase 3, build curriculum, build learning experiences, build meaningful collaboration experiences for your students online. Be curious yourself about what's possible. It's really, really easy to respond in a reactive way and say, hey, this isn't what I wanted. I can't do this. I can't do that. Be curious about what you can do. Come at it with a curiosity and a mindset of, I wonder. It makes more space and it makes the load a bit easier to carry. It's less heavy if we can come at it with curiosity. And then, of course, breathe again in phase 3. So I hope this overview has been helpful in understanding that this is a process that all of us are walking through. You are not alone, and it will change and evolve over time. It's true for all of us. And if you're interested in more about each one of these phases in more depth, speaking and giving examples of each of these boxes, please tune in to the next video for phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3. And if you're interested in doing more in-depth work in phase 3, please look for the opportunity to join an online course, Curriculum Design in Music Education for Home Learning, which will run between April and the end of the school year 2020 to support teachers who want to work specifically in that phase 3. So you can look on the webpage for that information as well.